Salud, amigos.
Welcome,
Tripulantes de
friends,
nuestra
members
querida,
of our dear, contaminated, and only spacecraft,
la misma que desde la última vez que nos vimos por
which
estos
since the
medios,
last day we saw has turned around its imaginary axis and continues generating
que tenemos un importante invitado,
events. If you don't see me standing, it's because we have a guest, and we have a very important guest.
con nosotros, Karina Ochoa,
With us, Karina Ochoa. She has a degree in sociology for the Metropolitan Autonomous University, Azcapotzalco in Mexico,
magíster en desarrollo rural,
Magister in Rural Development by the Autonomous Metropolitan Unit Xochimilco, Doctor in Rural Development by the Metropolitan Autonomous University of Xochimilco. She is part of the research system of UNAM 2013.
un año significativo también. La UAM. Por supuesto, es una activista.
Of course, she is a feminist activist, a professor and researcher of the Metropolitan University of Azcapotzalco,
Docente de la Universidad Autónoma de la Ciudad de México por 7 años, impartiendo clases en la licenciatura de Comunicación y
in
Cultura.
the degree of communication.
Es integrante del colectivo y del Grupo Latinoamericano de Estudios Formación y Acción Feminista. Como
She
parte de su
is member of
militancia,
the
colabora con
feminist
organizaciones de mujeres indígenas y feministas en México. Debate descolonial o
She has collaborated with different organizations of indigenous and feminist women in Mexico, a decolonial debate, or decolonizing debate. She works decolonized feminism and holds there are different decolonized feminism. This is very important. You're going to have to explain this. And it's a specific contribution to the decolonial debate, consisting in saying that the conquest and colonization dynamic is crossed by feminization of the colonized population. Besides being very interesting, this seems an exquisite approach coming from your academic level. I propose we enjoy from your presentation more than my questions. I would like to clarify something. I have been part of the Latin American group of study some years ago. This group was formed years behind, but I am no longer a member of this group. Nevertheless, I continue participating of different spaces of reflection, action, of the decolonizing debate. If after this declaration you want to start with discussion, because as we know, some decades ago in Latin America, a group of intellectuals, Latin American men and women, have positioned in reflection the debate called decolonial. Dr. Enrique Dussel is an essential reference in this discussion, and he has been in this program several times. And it is he who calls the decolonization, although the decolonizing attitude doesn't come from 2-3 decades, but more than 500 years from the moment Cristobal Colón stepped on these territories. This process also comes with the colonization. But as of the 90s, it started, it became significant. There are several elements. One of them is part of the basic Dussel's proposal that says that modernity is born in 1492 as a possibility, as a subjectivity. In other words, in the process of invading what we know now as American territories, Europe looks at itself under a unified center, and for this it needs another one. The American Indian peoples allow them to feel their superiority because they become inferiorized. We are the concealed face of modernity, the non-visible face. The luminous face of modernity has its expression in the illustration during the French Revolution, where the main banners are liberty, fraternity, etc. And we leave equality over there. We delay that. This is the luminous face of modernity that promises to emancipate by using technology and reason. It recovers the Kantian speech of leaving modernity. But this luminous is before a concealed face. This is interesting because it's like talking about the concealed face of the moon. If we don't visit it, we're never going to understand. This is what theoreticians of colonial science do, to reveal the concealed face that is a genocide face. The luminous process is before, upon an irrational act, the conquest and disappearance of entire peoples that are subjected and inferiorized for the luminous face to be possible. We have many times thought that the undesired consequences of modernity are collateral, and we say they are not collateral consequences but substantial elements for the creation of this luminous face of modernity. Now, many of the contributions made to this debate have been problematized from several places. I have made a series of proposals that contributes not only to the decolonizing debate in general, but talks about the role of subordination processes of female populations in our territories. I am included in the speech because the process of colonization of modernity implied the process of inferiorization and inhumanization of the indigenous. And the studies in the 16th century, especially by Bartolomé de las Casas, and also by Francisco Victoria, that is the ideologist of modernity, reveals things that is worth to deepen. Pero Serra Fry was there in the package, but let's say that those who gave the main letters of discussion about indigenous topics are these three theologians. Let's remember that positive law is did not exist there, but the theologists study. This is very dogmatic, of course, but let's remember that in the scholastic tradition, there's a recovery of Aristotle. So what we have in Gines de Sepúlveda is a recovery of Aristotle to justify. He was a fan of saying that indigenous were not human and could not be Christianized, and therefore the only thing that remained as an alternative was the slavery process. On the other pole, we have Bartolomé de las Casas that, on the contrary, says that indigenous Native American populations, they didn't talk about America at this time. At this time, we acknowledge this continental region. They clashed against something that is acknowledged. They didn't discover anything, and they found. And now comes the logic of invasion. There wasn't any discovery or encounter. So Bartolomé de las Casas is very interesting because he is acknowledged as a defensor. A very disturbing character in the colonization, but it's very interesting because Bartolomé de las Casas, in spite of defending humanity of indigenous, does not recognize indigenous people as they are. What he does is have a super positive view of the indigenous people. He says that indigenous in these territories are proto-Christians. They are telling me that we have an official transmission. We have a cut. It seems. We're going to have a pause and come back immediately.
The ruling world order has always subjugated the masses. But who are the actors behind every move? What are their real interests? We analyze every move on Critical Move. Weekdays, only on Telesur.
Acompañamos a los pueblos que resisten en cada una de sus luchas.
Somos esa ventana que se abre para visibilizarlos entre fronteras.
Thursdays, only on Telesur.
And this October 28th, the people of Brazil go to the polls again to elect their president in a second round vote where democracy is at stake. Divisions for the country compete amid tensions over decisive elections for the future of the South American region. Telesur brings you all the developments of the event from the giant of South America. We are connected with you on our website and social networks. Coverage Brazil Decides 2018. Second round vote. Only on Telesur, the news source of Latin America and the Caribbean.
Telesur brings you special interviews with social and political personalities. Monday, from Washington. Tuesday, from Mexico. Wednesday, from Caracas. Thursday, from Quito. Friday, from Havana. Analysis about our continent's reality. Weekdays, only on Telesur.
Volvemos con nuestra muy distinguida invitada, la doctora Karina Ochoa. Es hipergraduada y no voy a hacerle justicia a su currículum aquí porque lo que
I'm not
queremos
going to
es
tell your curriculum here because we want to receive your message. We were talking about the print left by the Catholic Church during the conquest. And I had a flashback, this huge building where we can happily keep more than one TV channel was a school before. And they said that there was a priest that appeared here and more than one got scared and went to the hospital, but that is part of the magic legend of this building. In any case, regarding the conquest, where did we stay? We stayed with Fray Bartolomé de las Casas, and I was saying that he's acknowledged as a defender of indigenous, and I added that finally, even he did defend the indigenous humanity, he didn't recognize him because for him, American Indians were proto-Christians. He argued that American Indians had an ethics, a natural Christian principle. They met all Christian qualities, goodness and all qualities, and the only thing that they missed is to know true God. The arguments that he used to say he was barbarians because he made human sacrifices. Bartolomé Las Casas said that the first Christians sacrificed their first child in the name of God. These people sacrificed themselves in the name of God. The only problem is that they don't know the real God. This is why the way Bartolomé de las Casas proposes is Pacific evangelization. What is that about sacrificing the first child? We have the first Christianism tradition that is broken when Isaac is not sacrificed. You may remember that the first Christians that are not the Trinitarian Christians, but the Aracene Christians that has as antecedent the Jew-Semite, but also the Quran tradition. These are Abraham religions. And in these religions, they recognize the sacrifice of the first son or child for God. The Aracene, this was for a long time object of all kinds of reactions. There was even a popular slogan, the Saracens came and beat us. God helps the bad when they're more than good. That is more dramatic than what it seems. It's very interesting because I think the history of Christianity has to be reviewed. And we will find a different understanding of what is happening in our territories upon colonization. I'm going to go back to these Dominic priests to make our contributions in feminism. I had great friends among Dominics, and I saw they were quite advanced in many aspects. This was a matter of concern for their bosses. Yes, there's a third priest, Fray Francisco Victoria, that really resolves the problem from proto-modern logics. Francisco Victoria, I think he didn't get to know the Valladolid dispute, but he makes a very important statement, unlike Bartolomé de las Casas and Sepúlveda's dispute about the indigenous humanity. He says that the Indian kings, like children, are entitled to their properties and territories. But as children, they have a problem of administration of their goods, and therefore they need an adult to administer those goods. Francisco de Vitoria is the father of international law, and I think that is the first that fundaments the modern logic, is that the indigenous problem is a problem of self-government, not humanity, of civil law. We can recognize these kings are entitled to their properties as the children, but they are missing the capacity of self-government. Therefore, those who have administered their goods are adult and better, let's say, Spanish men, etc., Christian. So he places the debate in a place related to sovereignty and the governance capacity. 500 years later, 1992, the Zapata uprising proposes we want to have right to decide on our own peoples. It's a problem that we are having for 500 years, and the demands of the indigenous movement in Mexico, but in the continent, are placed on the table 500 years later. Part of the contributions I make is that in these proposals, and Ginés de Sepúlveda and Bartolomé de las Casas, there's a tutelage over indigenous. Indians are seen as full subject. In some cases, it's seen as non-human, as Ginés de Sepúlveda says. In other cases, as a subhuman that can become, through an evangelization process, inhuman, as Bartolomé Las Casas says, or is seen as a child who needs a tutor. 500 years later, we would reach a conclusion that we reached adulthood. We have lost the condition of infantry and self-government. Many think that the independence process as nations of Latin America could have been that adulthood and the arrival to adulthood, but that was not so. The colonial and neo-colonial dependence is still effective in our people. What I do is a deeper analysis where I say that this tutorship established from theological principles that are still the basis of modern society
que al del infante, al de las mujeres. Porque las mujeres en todos los discursos
equals the tutorship to women more than child, because it passes from the father to the husband. Therefore, the infantile condition of women keeps a permanent tutorship that never ends, unlike the child's tutorship, boy child. So I started analyzing upon the theological speeches of the 16th century, where I see that the construction of the notion of indigenous is very similar with other elements, even textual references that say indigenous are like women or are like children. I start saying there's a process of concept of the indigenous where the reference of that other body nearby are women. That is, indigenous has as domination reference the domination process that European men performed against female populations, and there are many other elements, not only theological speeches, but also practices. Another, as a background in the witch hunt in Europe, many of the annihilation processes, disappearances of community networks through witch hunt that persons like Silvia Sevevich has recorded to understand the capitalistic process in Europe are domination mechanisms that later were brought to America and used against American populations, but no longer the sense against a sector of female population, but there's a biopolitic of power where these devices are applied against all populations. So we find records where we can see, Bartolomé Las Casas says it, with the arrival of the conquerors, with the invasion, there is annihilation of men that could represent the resistance to the invaders. And what they do is they leave alive these men that are feminized, that do not represent a possibility of resistance. Feminized in the sense that they are not acknowledged as male. They are only used for slavery.
Sí, un proceso de masculinización, digamos. Y eso nos ayuda a explicar muchos de los fenómenos que pasan.
That helps us explain many of the current phenomena. These colonial domination patterns that are related to the feminization of the original population can help us understand the feminicide processes. I know this is not your intention, but femicide is an epidemic. I think that femicide responds to a colonial pattern that has continued in time. We have feminization of indigenous population where all possibility of remnants of the male represents a danger. Everything related to male represents the possibility of resistance against the colonial.
digo, hay heroínas mujeres
There
porque hay un
are women
aniquilamiento
heroines
también de la
because
población
there's
masculina,
annihilation
por
of the
un
male
lado, y por otro lado
population,
porque las
and
mujeres
on
han
the
sido
other hand,
parte
because women
importante
have been
también
an
del desarrollo de
important
muchos
part of
pueblos
the development
originarios
of many
de estos
originary
territorios que tenían
peoples
otro tipo
of
de
these
papel dentro de
territories
estas
that had
sociedades
other
por imposición
roles in
española. Entonces se
these
puede explicar por muchos motivos, pero
societies.
uno de los cuales es que hubo
One of the
una lógica
reasons
de
is that
aniquilamiento de
there
las
was
poblaciones
an
masculinas porque
annihilation of
podían
male
representar resistencia a la
populations
invasión.
because they could
Y había una
resist the
lógica de
invasion,
solamente dejar a la población
and they only
vulnerable o a la
left a
población
vulnerable
que desde la mirada
population
del invasor
or the
no iba
population
a
that
oponer
from the
resistencia, lo cual
invader's
tampoco
view
pasó así
would
porque
not
hay muchas mujeres
resist,
a lo largo de la
which
historia
didn't happen
de la
so because
resistencia
throughout the history
que
there
pasa
are
no solo
many
por el nombre de
women's,
Bartolina Sisa
not
o
only
la negra
Bartolina
Guiomara aquí en
Sisa
Venezuela
or
o muchas
Negra
otras
Guiomara in
mujeres, Agustina Gómez
Venezuela,
Chechev, en el caso de
Agustina
Chiapas, que
Gómez
encabezaron
Chechev in Chiapas
ejércitos en contra
that
de
led
la
armies
corona y de la
against the
colonia y de la
crown,
administración
the
colonial.
colony.
Pero este proceso de
But
feminización, y
this
ahora voy a llegar al tema
feminization
del feminicidio,
process,
tiene
and I
como
will
otro
later
referente
talk
el
of
caso de las
femicide,
poblaciones
has as reference
secuestradas
the
y traídas en calidad
populations
o en
that were
cualidad de esclavas
kidnapped
a
and
este
brought as
continente, a las
slaves
cuales nunca
to this
se les
continent,
dio ni siquiera la
which
posibilidad de ser
never were
reconocidas
given the
como humanas.
possibilities
A
of
esas
being
poblaciones,
recognized
por
as
tanto,
human.
se
Those
les dio en lugar de
populations,
esclavos,
therefore, were
porque eran
given the
bestializadas.
place
Yo hago
of
esta
slaves.
distinción. Mientras
I
a las
make this
poblaciones negras se les
distinction
bestializa,
while
por lo tanto, el
black
sistema de dominación y
population were
explotación pasa por el esclavismo. En el caso de las
exploited through
poblaciones
slavery.
amerindias, hay un
The
proceso de feminización que
Amerindian
implica un proceso de
populations
suburbanización
underwent
o no
a
plena humanidad,
feminization
o una humanidad no
process
plena
or
donde se les consideran
subhumanization
productores de objetos,
process
donde el sistema de
where
explotación
the
es la
exploitation
servidumbre
system is
y
servitude
no la esclavitud.
and
Ahora, el
not
desarrollo del
slavery.
capitalismo necesita
Diferencia entre servidumbre y esclavitud en ese caso colonial.
Difference
sí, por un
between
lado
servitude
tenemos
and
que la
slavery.
esclavitud
Well,
este
slavery
elemento
Es un
fundamental,
objeto.
es un objeto,
is
es
an
una bestia,
object, is a beast.
¿no? Es una bestia que no tiene que ser de
That
ninguna manera
must
considerada
not
con ningún derecho de
considered
humanidad. Entonces lo que hay que
to
hacer
have
es
any humanity
explotarla al
right. So
máximo sin ningún tipo de
that person
restricción
must be
y mientras
exploited as long
exactamente.
as
Mientras
he or
que en
she
el caso de la
lasts.
servidumbre,
While
es la
servitude
servidumbre y el
is
indígena feminizado
the
se convierte
feminized
en el
indigenous
precedente
becomes
del
the
obrero.
precedent of workers.
Interesante eso, ¿eh? Vaya salto.
O sea,
That is quite a
el
leap.
capitalismo necesita
Well,
de la
capitalism
servidumbre
needs
como
servitude
mecanismo para el
as a
desarrollo
mechanism to
paulatino del
gradual
propio
development
capitalismo.
of
El
capitalism.
esclavismo por sí mismo
Slavery
no va a dar
by
el salto
itself
al
will
desarrollo
not
del
lead
capitalismo,
to
pero también
capitalistic
existe el
development, but is
esclavismo para el
also
desarrollo del capitalismo.
exists.
Entonces, estos dos sistemas, el de servidumbre y
So
el
both
esclavo,
systems,
son los que
servitude and
posibilitan el
slavery,
desarrollo
enable the
del
development of
capitalismo. Ahora
capitalism.
bien, este proceso de
Now,
feminización,
this
yo
process of
sostengo que tiene un
feminization,
continuum
in
en
my
el tiempo
opinion,
y que
has
se
a
expresa en
continuum in
fenómenos
time
como el
and is
proceso de feminicidio o
expressed
como
in
el
phenomena
incremento
like
de las
femicide or
violencias
the increase
machistas
of
en las
macho
sociedades
violences
nuestras.
in our
¿Y por qué?
societies
Que no ha bajado, además.
No ha bajado, sigue
that
incrementando.
continues
Y esto
Yo
increasing.
cuando
tiene que
digo
ver
qué interesante me siento
When I
sacrílego,
say
¿no? Pero qué
how
interesante es un enfoque,
interesting,
digo, no,
I say it's an approach
Sí, es
because
muy
the topic
escabroso, pero
is
tiene que ver
terrible.
con cómo
Yes, but
en
it is
sociedades
related to
donde los
how in
mandatos
societies where
masculinos,
male
como el de
mandates,
que seas
such
protector,
as being
seas proveedor,
protector,
seas
be a
fuerte,
provider, to be
administrador,
strong,
administrador,
de
administrator,
bienes y haciendas y de vidas.
exacto.
goods,
Entonces,
farms,
todos
and
estos
lives.
mandatos masculinos,
So all these male
que te
mandates
permitirían, en
that
calidad
would
de hombre,
allow
una
you as a
autoafirmación
man,
masculina,
a
no
male
pueden ser posibles en
self-determination
sociedades, por
are
ejemplo, en México,
impossible in
incrementado la
societies.
violencia de manera,
For example,
en
Mexico
México y
violence has,
Centroamérica,
in
¿no? O sea,
Central
entonces,
America,
un
violence
varón,
has
padre de
increased.
familia,
So a
heterosexual,
man,
etcétera,
parent,
sale a las calles con
heterosexual,
su familia y no
leaves
puede
the
garantizar la
streets to
seguridad de
his
su familia.
family and
Si sale
cannot
un sicario, si sale un
guarantee the
asaltante,
security of their
le da un
families.
tiro, no puede hacer
If
nada
a
por
criminal
garantizar
kills
el
them, he
mandato de
can't do
protección
anything to
queda anulado.
protect. The
Tampoco ante la
protection
situación
mandate is
económica que
annulled
vivimos en los
in
países
the economic
latinoamericanos y
situation
caribeños,
of Latin American
un integrante
Caribbean
masculino de la
countries.
familia
One
trabajando
male
sería
member
incapaz
of
de
the
sostener una
family
familia. Tienen que trabajar la mayor
cannot
parte
support
de
the
los
family.
integrantes
Most
adultos y
members,
muchas veces hasta no
adults
adultos
and
de la
even
familia, para que
non-adult
puedan tener
members
un nivel de
must work
sobrevivencia en
to
ciertos sectores
survive
sociales.
in
Con
certain
lo cual,
social
los mandatos
sectors,
masculinos no
with
pueden
which
ser
the male
realizados,
mandates
y los
cannot
procesos
be
de autoafirmación
realized, and the
masculina,
male
son imposibles en las circunstancias en las que
self-affirmation
vivimos en las
processes are
sociedades
impossible in
latinoamericanas y
our
caribeñas.
Latin
En ese
American
sentido, lo único que
societies.
queda
The only thing left is the monopoly of use of the physical force, the use of force to guarantee male affirmation. Then we can understand how femicides and the increase of macho violence is part of these reasonings of masculinization. We need to stop with these toxic masculinities to build non-toxic masculinity, to affirm the male strength without the violence against women. The violence against women is also colonial because 500 years ago, with the annihilation of male populations, and the preservation of these feminized men, women, and children, the genocide violence has a direct effect on female bodies and children's bodies and feminized men. So this dynamic has not changed much, only the form, but in essence the colonial domination pattern prevails. We could make a record of colonial domination patterns that have their origin 500 years ago and that prevails at present in our societies. Racism, because my essential thesis is that colonial domination patterns have as reference misogynist processes in Europe. We also have the case of the Muslim world, where we have the idea of race. The reference of the oppression systems of Europe that are exported during the conquest. But we also have racism. Racial imposition transfigures all the misogynist and patriarchal logic and turns it into a racial logic, since it is applied against the entire society. Racism has a weird process between European misogyny and patriarchy transferred to racism. Another colonial domination pattern, and I will say it very quickly, is related to the fact that the colonized and conquered populations were destined to be illiterate, rural, and we were, all forms of life recreation were taken away. Symbolic forms or objective forms like our architecture, our art, our language, and we were destined to be inferior, illiteral, rural, barbarians, underdeveloped, etc. Zero social mobility, of course, through the racial logics. What role does the church play there? It is essential in the process because if we go back to the beginning of this interview, I start with the theological speeches of the 16th century, and I said that it is the theological debate because at the time, the positive law was in existence, and what legitimizes the empire of Spain is related to religion. They arrive with the spade and the cross represents the ideological justification to conquest the peoples. That they say were discovered, but we know they were not discovered but invaded. So, of course, it is essential, are the theological speech, and the church is essential because the church operates. On one hand, there's the armed invasion, all the genocide, and on the other hand, there is the ideological invasion, which comes with the cross. Undoubtedly.
¿Alguien se preocupa de estos valores
Is
hoy en día,
anybody
aparte de la
concerned
existencia
about these
académica de gente?
values besides the academy of people like you?
¿O el revisionismo está mal
Or is
visto?
revisionism?
Yo la verdad es que cada vez estoy más
I
convencida
am
que el
increasingly
debate colonial
convinced that the
está siendo
colonial
más
debate is
comprendido
being
por la
better
gente de a
understood by
pie
the
que por
people,
la propia academia.
simple people, than
El
by
debate
the
descolonial resulta
academics.
muy
Because the colonial debate
controversial
is quite
dentro del ámbito académico.
controversial
Esto
in
tiene
the
que ver con el ejemplo
academic
que iba a dar sobre estos
atmosphere,
otros
and this
patrones
is
de
related
dominación
on
que
the
prevalecen.
example of
En
other
el sentido de
domination
que, por
patterns that
ejemplo, las
prevail.
poblaciones amerindias, al ser
Amerindian
destinadas a ser
populations,
iletradas,
when
a
they
ser
were destined to be
todo tipo de
illiterate,
conocimiento que se
underdeveloped,
produce desde
all
este sector,
knowledge
desde estos
produced
sectores de las
from
poblaciones
those
racializadas,
sectors
no se le considera
is
conocimiento,
not
se le
considered
considera un
knowledge,
saber,
it is considered
Repita
a
eso,
wisdom.
¿no se le considera?
conocimiento
Sino un
válido,
saber.
es un saber. Entonces la partera,
So the
el
midwife,
médico, la médica
the
tradicional, la
traditional
chamana, el
physician, the
chamán, lo que
shaman,
tienen son saberes,
they
no tienen
have
conocimiento. El
wisdom.
conocimiento lo tiene un doctor, lo tiene un
Knowledge
ingeniero,
has a
el
doctor, an
campesino que
engineer,
conoce
the
perfectamente
peasant
cómo
that knows
hacer el
very
trabajo de
well
la tierra,
how
en
to
qué
work the
momento,
land,
que
what
utiliza una
time
serie de técnicas y
to, and
métodos
use a
para
series of
la
techniques
labranza.
and methods.
Sí, y si además viene la plaga, sabe
And
perfectamente
if
qué utilizar, en
plagues
qué
come,
momento
they
del año.
know when
Todo
to
eso
use
no
the
es
time of the
considerado
moon.
como
Nothing
conocimiento,
of
es
that is
considerado como
considered
superstición o
knowledge.
como
It's
saber.
considered superstition or
Y esto
wisdom.
es parte de los patrones de dominación colonial.
And that
porque
is part of
entonces el
the
único
colonial
saber es el
domination
saber
patterns,
científico,
because the
que es
only
el saber,
knowledge is the
el único conocimiento
scientific
válido se da en
knowledge.
las instituciones
And that
educativas,
takes place
que son las
in
universidades que tienen el método
universities
científico,
that
que es el
have the
método
scientific
racionalista y
method that is
positivo.
rationalistic
Y
and
que además traen
positive,
toda la carga
and
doctrinaria
that bring all the
del conquistador.
doctrinary load from the
Totalmente, que trae toda la
conquerors.
carga doctrinaria del modelo,
Of course,
moderno,
of the modern
que es el modelo
model
del sistema mundo moderno
of the
colonial.
modern colonial model.
Entonces, claro,
So,
todo el método científico
The scientific
nos plantea
method proposes
un
a
enorme problema,
huge
porque nosotros
problem
los
because
científicos
a
vamos a
scientist
observar,
will
¿no?
observe,
Los científicos sociales, por ejemplo,
social
nosotros
scientists, for
vamos a
example, we will
observar a
observe
nuestros objetos
our
de investigación.
objects of
Vamos al laboratorio
investigation.
social.
We go
Pero
to the
siempre mirando
social
hacia abajo.
laboratory,
Siempre mirando hacia
but
abajo y
always
desde un
looking
lugar de
downwards
neutralidad.
and from a place of
Como si
neutrality,
nosotros no
as
cargáramos
if
con una
we
mirada del
didn't
mundo, con
have
unos lentes que están
glasses of the
construidos
world
desde
that are
el sentido del
built
mundo de la
from the
modernidad,
sense of
que lo que hacen
modernity
es
that
reproducir la lógica
reproduces
racionalista,
the rationalistic,
positivista moderna,
positivistic
pensando
modern
que es la
thought,
objetividad.
thinking
Somos
that
químicamente
is
puros.
Y somos
objectivity,
químicamente
and we are
puros. Entonces, hay
chemically
tres
pure.
falacias fundamentales
So
en el
there
pensamiento
are
científico: la
three
pretensión de
lies:
neutralidad, la
the
pretensión
pretension
de
of
objetividad y la
neutrality,
pretensión de
objectivity,
universalidad.
and
Esa
universality.
última sí, cada vez más difícil, pese a todo la
The
interconexión
last is
mundial
very
con los satélites.
difficult in spite of
Pese a
the
todo,
world
hay una
connection
pretensión de
with
universalidad, es
satellites.
decir, el conocimiento científico es universal.
Scientific knowledge is
¿no? Aunque
universal,
no lo sea,
even if it
lo
isn't.
asume como
It
universal.
is
Y
assumed
este
as
conocimiento es
universal.
profundamente
And this
eurocéntrico,
knowledge is
pero como
deeply
nos posicionamos,
Eurocentric.
como diría
But
Santiago
since,
Castro Gómez,
as
desde el
Santiago
híbrido
Castro
del punto
Gómez said,
cero,
since the
entonces
zero
pareciera
point,
Eso, disculpe mi ignorancia,
Sí,
Santiago Castro Gómez dijo.
plantea que el
Santiago
conocimiento
Castro
científico
Gómez
y, por
proposes
tanto, la
that
mirada del científico
scientific
se posiciona desde el híbrido
vision
del punto cero,
is
desde el lugar cero, desde el
positioned
Big
from
Brother,
zero,
¿no?
from the
Desde
Big
eso que uno
Brother,
lo mira, pero que lo mira con esa
from the
pretensión
place
de
where
neutralidad que es
they
real,
have a
porque en
sight,
realidad
the neutral
todo
sight, which is
este
unreal,
conocimiento
because
moderno
all
en
this
realidad
modern
contiene la
knowledge actually
reproducción
contains
del
a
sentido del mundo de la
reproduction of the
modernidad y el
sense of
racionalismo
modernity and
moderno.
modern
Entonces,
rationality.
obviamente nosotros creemos
So of course
que,
we believe that
que, bueno, el conocimiento científico es el
scientific
conocimiento legítimo y
knowledge is the
verdadero,
legitimate
y que el
and true
conocimiento
knowledge,
campesino,
and
que el
that the
conocimiento
peasant
popular es más en términos
knowledge,
del arte,
popular
pero el
knowledge, is
arte
more in
está en las
terms of
bellas
art.
artes, mientras que
Well,
lo que hace
art is in
un
fine arts,
productor,
while what
una
a producer, a
artesana
craftsman
es
does
artesanía.
is craft.
O sea, en los procesos de
So
jerarquización
the hierarchy
que dan
processes
sentido a la
that give
estructura
sense to
de
the
organización
structure
de nuestros
of
pueblos a partir
organization
del
of our
proceso de
people
conquista,
since
invasión
the
y colonización,
conquest,
se ha
invasion, and
transferido a todos los
colonization
niveles de la vida.
has been
La
transferred
academia
to
por un
all
lado,
levels of life.
El arte por otro,
Academics on one hand, art on the other side, and we see closer that hierarchy appears all time. Who produces art? Usually it is the the wider sectors, the elites, that in terms of race, class, and gender is privileged, and who produces craft? The poorest people in terms of race, class, and gender. So these hierarchies that seem so natural, we just say, get a job. We see the ruins with astronomical observatories. We find traces like that, but that was interrupted, the development of those ways of reproduction, of art, knowledge, the sense of the world that is also related to spirituality was interrupted with a conquest. In the Altiplano, you see that door is because the sun will come through there, and that means a series of ceremonies and the reference to what is correct to work the land. And it has been presented as myth, rituality, when truly the modern world is completely ritual, but we don't call that rituality. We live a rituality of modernity, and this is impressive, but that is not rituality. The other does have to understand as rituality and ways of knowledge, but modernity is completely ritual and religious. The modern project, in terms of its political structure, is tremendously religious, only that the dimension
sí, religiosa, digamos, voy a dar un ejemplo muy puntual. ¿Cómo está
I'm going to give a specific example. How is the modern structure of state organized? We have a president who represents God on earth. Every 6 years he is appointed. We have a sacred book, the Bible. If we
digamos el paralelo, nos vamos dando cuenta que el Estado moderno en realidad es un Estado que
we notice that the modern state recovers all the structure of the church, or the religious structure, but in the lycism process,
religiosa y va dejando solo la estructura.
Takes away its religious and leaves the structure. Weber has the book of Protestant ethics and the spirit of capitalism, and explains how it enables the development of capitalism. I remember summaries of very hard government that said, had a slogan. Yes, the modern project is fed. When you asked what the church has to do, it continues having a role. The modern state structure also came from the religious structure of the church, but that in the like processes has been taken away the elements of faith. When does the Mason logic appear? In the independence processes. I think there's much to start exploring. I think one of the things that calls the decolonizing debate is read our history. When you say the Mason influence in the independence processes and characters that were essential, I think we must reread that from this decolonizing view. We need to have a view from the past from another place, which has very important implications now related to processes in Venezuela. There as well, because you're not contaminated. I want to take your knowledge for all our viewers. The decolonizing debate has a great potentiality because it allows us to see each other again. We need to dialogue with the past. That will allow us to rethink the story we have been told, because as we know, history is written by the winners. And one of the powerful invitations of our decolonizing topic is that we need to dialogue with with our past. And this means rewrite history. Rethink not only our history in regional terms, but in world terms. We have to rethink, rewrite.
Tenemos que disputar una otra versión de la historia.
We must dispute another version of history.
Sí, va de retro, sin duda. Porque además necesitamos escribir
Because we
una
need
historia
to
mundial
write
que
a
sea
world
mundial.
history that is
Porque la
world.
historia universal que
Because
nos
the
enseñaron
universal
es la historia
history
de
we
Europa.
were taught is this history of
Muy,
Europe.
muy exactamente.
That is
Eso sí
exactly
es poner el dedo en la
right.
llaga.
Y
Es eurocéntrico el tema.
Exacto. Y
The topic is
justamente
Eurocentric, and today we
platicábamos, y
were
aquí vengo
talking,
al tema
and
Venezuela,
here I come
porque
to
es necesario
Venezuela
empezar a
topic
revisar
because
los
we need to review the
currículos
curriculum
desde una mirada de
from
Sí,
a
desde
decolonized
Venezuela, por
view.
ejemplo, hay un intento
Venezuela
importante
is
de
an
decir, a ver, ¿qué
attempt,
es lo
an important
descolonial?
attempt
¿Y eso qué
to see
significa?
what does
¿No?
decolonizing mean.
¿Qué? ¿Eso está de moda lo descolonial?
It
¿Qué
is
sería lo
a
descolonial?
fashion
En realidad, lo
or what?
descolonial es una plataforma para
Decolonize
hacer un
is a
trabajo
platform
que
to
implica
do a
repensar
work
nuestro
that means
lugar
rethinking our
repensar el lugar
place
que hemos
and
tenido
rethink the
históricamente.
place we've
¿Por qué?
had
Porque el
historically.
problema colonial
Because the
no ha
colonial
desaparecido,
problem
y
has
no ha
not
desaparecido sobre
disappeared,
todo porque hemos
especially
sido
because we have been
colonizados
colonized
internamente.
internally.
Es decir, nuestras conciencias,
Our
nuestras mentes, nuestros
conscience,
sentidos
our
del mundo
minds,
han
and
sido
sense of the
colonizados.
world
Parece que
has
hasta
been
los genes.
colonized. Even the
Parece que
genes.
hasta transformar la
They
información
even
genética.
transform
Entonces,
genetic
necesitamos hacer ese trabajo de
information, so we
descolonización
have to
interna.
decolonize
Y una forma de
internally.
contribuir a ese cambio de chip es que necesitamos ver nuestra
And a way of
desde otro lugar.
contributing
Entonces,
to that
necesitamos
change
hacer una
of
revisión de las
chip
currículas.
is
Y ese
to
no es solo un
review
desafío
curriculum,
de
and
Venezuela, digamos,
this
que
is
hay
not
un
only
intento,
challenge
de
in
abrazar
Venezuela,
esta propuesta, sí,
an attempt
sino que es
that
un
is,
desafío de
it's
todos
a
los países
challenge of all Latin
muchos
American,
intelectuales, de muchos
many
historiadores,
intellectuals,
historiadoras,
historians,
pedagogos, etcétera, etcétera.
pedagogues in
Necesitamos
Latin
empezar a hacer
America.
esas
We have to
transformaciones
need to make
puntuales y
those
objetivas.
specific and
Por ejemplo, yo
objective
el otro día
transformations.
tuve una entrevista y me la
The other day I
realizaron
had an
de
interview
entrevista en
made
el área
in
de,
the
libros
area
raros
of
de
rare
la
books
Biblioteca
of the
Nacional.
National
Entonces, yo
Library.
llego y me dicen,
So I
"Este
arrived
es
and he
el
said,
primer libro que
look,
se imprimió
this
en
is the
el
first
siglo,
book
tal en
printed in
Venezuela", ¿no? Y
such a
entonces
century in
leo
Venezuela.
el pie al calce,
I
la
read
anotación al calce, y
the
entonces
note
dice,
and said,
en América,
in
durante el
America during the
descubrimiento,
discovery
encuentro.
dash
Y yo me
encounter.
escandalicé.
And
Dije,
I was
"No puede ser
scandalized.
posible.
It can't
No
be
puede ser
possible
posible que sigamos
that we
reproduciendo
continue
incluso
reproducing
desde
even
gobiernos de avanzada progresista
from
estos
progressive
discursos.
governments.
Porque si nosotros no cambiamos estos
Because if
discursos,
we
vamos
don't
a seguir
change these
reproduciendo los
speeches, we will
modelos
continue
de
reproducing
estados
models of
modernos que nos van
modern
a meter en las
states
mismas
that
encrucijadas.
will
Porque
get
al no
us
ser
into the same
construidos como
problems.
plenamente humanos,
Because since
al
they're
no ser
not
construidos
built
desde
as
el siglo
fully
XVI con la
human,
posibilidad de
since the
plenitud de la
16th
existencia humana,
century,
y al
since the
mantener el
possibility of
continuum
full
de los patrones de
human
dominación, lo que
existence,
tenemos hoy es la
what we
imposibilidad
have
de la
today is the
plena ciudadanía. Si nosotros seguimos
impossibility of
replicando
full
los modelos
citizenship.
modernos de
If we
Estado, de
continue to
gobierno y de
apply the
formas de
modern
gobernarnos,
models
aunque
of
seamos las
states of
revoluciones más
governing us,
revoluciones y los
we could
gobiernos
be
más
the most
progresistas,
progressive
estamos reproduciendo
revolutions.
una lógica que
We
nos
are
va a destinar a
reproducing
seguir siendo
something
periferias,
that will
a seguir
lead us
siendo
to
países
continue being
subdesarrollados o en
peripheries,
vías de desarrollo,
underdeveloped or
es decir, a
developing
seguir siendo
countries,
infantes que
to
aspiran
continue
a
being
llegar a la
children who
condición de
aspire to
mayoría de edad, pero
reach
que pasan
the
500
legal
años y no
age,
podemos
but after
acceder a
500
ella.
years we
Seguimos
can't
como el burro tras la
have
zanahoria.
El
access.
tema de la periferia es dramático.
The
¿no?
periphery
Estas
is
oleadas que hay
dramatic
ahora
because all
hacia
these
Estados Unidos por
waves
tierra,
we
¿cómo
find
se interpretan
today,
en ese marco?
Se interpretan
they are
justamente
interpreted.
Van desde Centroamérica, pasan por México,
They
aparece
go
el
from
energúmeno de la
Central
Casa Blanca, como
America,
se
they
llama,
go through
y quieren
Mexico,
montar un
the
muro.
madman of the
Yo crucé
White
el muro de
House.
Berlín un par de veces durante la Guerra Fría, ¿no? No sé cómo se lo imagina él, pero
I crossed the
es una
Berlin
cosa
Wall
monstruosa que
during
además
the
tenga
Cold War several
coraje de
times.
plantearlo.
I don't
sí,
know
es
how he
tremendo,
imagines
es
it,
tremendo,
but
pero volvemos otra vez a cómo
yes,
explicar
we are
este tipo de
going back
fenómenos
to
a
explain
través
these
de estos
phenomena
patrones de
through
dominación
these
colonial que tienen un continuum.
colonial
¿no? O
domination
sea, a mí me
patterns.
parecía ya, a mí
I
me parece
thought
muy
that
fuerte. En México, yo
is
antes de venir a
very
Venezuela,
strong.
escuchaba ya en la radio, leía en
Before
la prensa que
coming
decían,
here, I
este es un
listened to the
fenómeno
radio that
inédito,
this is
nunca
an
en la historia
unprecedented
de nuestro país
phenomenon.
había habido
Never in
estos
the
procesos
history of our
masivos de
country
migración
did we
que
have
vinieran de
massive
Centroamérica, y
process
yo de
of
repente dije,
migration
nadie
from
está
Central
diciendo que
America.
este tipo de
And I
migraciones
thought
se
nobody's
dan solo
saying
en
that these
contextos de guerra.
migrations are
Tenemos
only take
5.600.000
place in
colombianos
war
aquí.
process. We have almost 6 million Colombians here, and Colombia has 6 or 7 carrier bases.
Y la del Medio Oriente son 45 días de navegación. Con chola a fondo, si todo avante en términos marítimos son 40 días.
Claro, y Venezuela contribuyó
Venezuela
para
contributed to make visible that what we were living in Colombia was a war. Venezuela received the displaced communities.
Que no quieren repartir nada con su propio pueblo.
Exactamente.
Cuando educación y salud
when
gratis,
education and free education, health and medication.
Educación gratis.
Not even Chile.
Anatema.
Por supuesto. Ahora la pregunta es ¿cuándo Estados Unidos
va a
reconocer
when
que ha generado
will the
una
United
guerra
States recognize
que
it
tiene
created a war that
desplazamiento
results in
masivo
the
de
massive
familias,
displacement
hombres,
of
mujeres, niños,
families,
ancianos, niñas enteras,
all
que ahora
members
van
that are now
dirección
going
a quien está generando esta condición.
Se volvió un boomerang, le va a dar en la nuca.
Exacto, que le está
towards
dando en la
the
nuca,
countries
y que
who
lo está
generated
evidenciando.
this.
Y Aimé Césaire, en Discurso sobre el Colonialismo, tiene un texto muy interesante
Aimé
cuando
Césaire
dice
has an
Europa está
interesting
moribunda
book
y
when
Europa
it
es una
says that
civilización muerta,
Europe
porque
is a
dice
dead
una
civilization because
que
a
es
civilization that is
incapaz de
unable to
resolver los
resolve the
problemas que provoca
problems it
es una
causes
civilización muerta.
is a dead civilization.
Pero no termina de morir la vieja Europa.
But
No termina de
it's
morir,
not dead yet,
pero tampoco está viva.
but it's not
Me
alive
interesa muchísimo ese
either.
enfoque.
Sí, hay un tema que tiene que ver con la sobrevivencia.
There's a topic
O sea,
related to
el
survival.
proyecto de la modernidad nos ha lanzado a las
The
lógicas
project
y el
of
capitalismo nos
modernity
ha lanzado a las
launched
lógicas
us,
de
and
sobrevivencia.
capitalism has
Pero la
launched us
sobrevivencia no es la
to
vida.
survival. But survival is not
¿no?
life.
Entonces, en un primer momento, y este es un debate súper interesante porque tiene que ver con
It's an
justamente
interesting
algo que
debate
plantea
because
Ramón
it's
Grosfoguel,
related to something that
que ha
Ramón
estado en
Grosfoguel
diversos programas
has been in
contigo
different
y que
programs with
estará,
you,
entiendo, pronto
and
también,
I
así que
understand
habrá que
will be
esperar
soon there,
nuevamente su cátedra
here.
en este
Esperamos que así
espacio.
sea.
So,
Y Ramón Grosfoguel hace la
wait for
distinción
his,
entre la zona del ser y no ser.
educated
La
here,
lógica de la
so he
modernidad
differentiates
colonial,
the
el
logic
sistema
of
mundo-moderno-colonial,
colonial,
lo que ha hecho es una división
made a
entre la zona del
division
ser,
between the
¿no?
being,
O sea, la zona de los nortes globales, la zona donde
the zone of
Estados
global
Unidos,
norths where the United
Europa, los
States,
países del
Europe,
primer mundo
the
son
first
esas
world
zonas donde
countries
sí existe la noción del sujeto pleno, la
do
ciudadanía,
have
que
the
son
notion
donde
of
se,
full
se desarrolla la
citizenship,
posibilidad de la
where
existencia
there's
y
the
del ser. Y
possibility
luego
of
tenemos todas las
existence
zonas
and
del no
being.
ser, que somos
And
todas
then we
estas
have all the
periferias,
zones
que
of
somos los países
non-being,
excolonizados
peripheries,
y neocolonizados, que
formerly
obviamente
colonized
por nuestras propias
countries that,
condiciones de
because of our
subdesarrollo y de
own
subhumanidad,
conditions of
aparecemos en una
underdevelopment,
zona en donde no podemos
appear in
tener
a
una
zone
existencia
where we
plena, es
can't
decir,
have
en
a
la
full
zona de la
existence.
sobrevivencia.
We are around the
Entonces,
survival.
yo justamente hago, a
So,
partir de este planteamiento
upon
de
this
Ramón Grosfoguel,
statement,
una
Ramón
redefinición de la lógica
makes a
del poder,
redefinition
¿no?
of
Porque desde
the
la
reasoning
perspectiva,
of
por
power.
ejemplo, de
Because
Max Weber,
from,
el
according
poder
to Max
es esta
Weber,
relación mando-obediencia.
power is this command-obedience
Yo aludo
relation.
a llegar a una otra
I
perspectiva
want
del
to
poder
reach
que
another
tiene como
perspective
principio
of
la lógica
power that
vida-muerte.
has the logic
Y recuerdo
life
a
and
Díaz
death
Canetti que
as
dice, el poderoso es el
perspective.
sobreviviente, es el
And
que
Díaz
puede
Canel says the powerful is
hacer el acto
he
de
who
ejecución
survives,
del otro
he who
para mantenerse en vida. Pero no se
executes the
mantiene en
other
vida,
to
sino en
remain
sobrevivencia. ¿Qué
alive,
significa
but he
esto?
doesn't remain
El
alive, but
problema
only in
es que el proyecto
survival.
moderno cree que
The
estar en la
modern
zona del
project
ser
believes
es una zona
that
de vida, pero
being
en
in
realidad es
the
una zona
zone
de
of
sobrevivencia.
being
Ellos
is a
tampoco
life
están liberados. Estados
condition.
Unidos cree
United States believes
ser el
they are
triunfador,
free and that
pero en
it is the
realidad la
winner. But
civilización
actually,
moderna
modern
ha hecho
civilization
que, por
has
ejemplo, en
made
Estados Unidos se vivan situaciones y
live
circunstancias
situations and
que no
circumstances
garantizan el
that do
proceso de
not
emancipación que
guarantee
prometió la modernidad.
emancipation
Estados
process that
Unidos tiene
modernity
problemas
promised.
inmensos
United
de
States has
violencia,
huge
tiene
problems of
inmensos de
violence,
suicidio, tiene problemas
suicide,
inmensos asociados al uso de drogas, tiene
drugs,
procesos de alienación
the use of
excesivos,
drugs,
problemas de
alienation
gordura,
process,
podemos añadir todos los problemas que
overweight.
tiene
We
Estados
can
Unidos,
add all
como
problems the
país,
United States
y
has
lo
as
que
a
pasa
country.
es que hemos
And
nosotros
what
creído
happens
desde la
is
zona del no
that
ser que la
from the zone of non-being, that their aspiration is arrive to the second, because that will allow us to live. That does not allow life, that allows survival. And now we have to deny death as a first step to approach the possibility of reproducing life. You can imagine the stereotype of the working class in the United States, a man full of carbohydrates, overweight, and only reaches home to watch TV instead of being in family. And we think that is life, and that is the bet. Television is larger, and when we watch television, we eat a series of terrible things. So we have to see what is our minutes to conclude. I would conclude with this. We have to rethink the stake for life, for humanity, and what kind of life, what values. I don't know if life is purchasing a cell phone, the best of the world, because my need is communication, but I suddenly think that I need to have a mobile phone when what I need is to communicate. We need to go back to the elements that allow life reproduction. The problem is that we have remained in elements that make life possible, thinking that that is life. So we have to think how we want to live. What do we want to do with life? In that sense, I believe that the decolonizing debate contributes much. In Venezuela, it seems to be a disadvantageous situation, but I think it's a great opportunity to rethink the stakes for life. There are pains of delivery, pain is hurtful. Sometimes we start processes of suffering instead of assimilating pain. We need ways to reproduce life through reproducing the community, and we need to get rid of the ego that makes us believe that the horizon of liberation is the horizon of U.S. life, and the American way of life does not free us. That project is not a project of life, but a project of death. I must underline that. The experience is not transferable, but I do not theorize. Because of invitations, I have visited the United States north to east, east to west. But what you see there with a healthy spirit, without any envies, they wouldn't dream to have a CDI, a first quality assistance and education. Sometimes they mortgage the house for one of the children to go to university. And they live processes of much dehumanization and fascism. I think that they go directly to a fascist problem. And this guy at the White House that purchased the presidency, since he was accustomed everybody to say, yes, sir, I think that position needs to be fascism that has to be the resistance against migrants is related to the fear of difference. They are so fearful that they must protect themselves, and it's not a problem with the others. The problem now is that I have to, unfortunately, end the program. I thank you very much. Next time, please come through this dossier.
Bueno, yo no puedo hacerle a Karina Ochoa, representante dignísima de
Karina Ochoa, representative of sister nation of Mexico. I cannot give her a goodbye, a farewell as she deserves, because our director is signaling, saying that this show is over and it has been an honor to have you here.
Me subiré esta nave.
I will come to this craft. Welcome on board.